Welcome to the Chai Academy, coming to you live for now. You'll see it later, it won't be live. But for now, it's being recorded live at the Chai Center. So I am Rabbi Sachs, and we're in the middle of just started, rather, a few days ago, a course on fascinating Jewish personalities. Each class is encapsulated, self-contained, and one needn't worry about a previous class. So, just for your information, we've spoken about Eli Wiesel, spoken about Leo Frank, Hannah Senesh, or Zenesh, and today we're going to be talking about Kook, Rabbi Kook. So he's affectionately known as Rav Kook. His full name is Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, spelled K-O-O-K, and Abraham Isaac Kook. So basically, his claim to fame is a simple Wikipedia will tell you that he was the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi in British mandated Palestine, in Israel. The first chief rabbi. So, and there's been many chief rabbis, and they're all holy and pure and special. A couple of them are in jail, or have been in jail, but there's something very, very special about this one, and it really was because he was the first. And as we'll explain, what he accomplished in his life was amazing, and I am just dynamic individual. So he was born in 1865. He was born in current day Latvia. I don't think it was called Latvia back then. And he was the eldest of 8 children. It's interesting, his father came from non-Hasidic stock, but his mother came from Hasidic stock. So he kind of had both influences in his life, but he gravitated towards more non-Hasidic Orthodox stock, and in fact he went to Volozhin Yeshiva, which is like the motherboard of non-Hasidic Orthodoxy. Volozhin. If you want to say Volozhin, where is Volozhin in the United States? It would probably be Lakewood, New Jersey. And he studied in Volozhin for a year and a half. And the head of the academy, Rabbi Berlin, said if the entire Volozhin Yeshiva only existed strictly to have Abraham Isaac Kook in our yeshiva, then it was all worth it. At 21, he married his teacher, his specific teacher's daughter. So he was considered an Ilui, a child, prodigy, and very, very bright and best of the bunch, and his own head of his own teacher, his personal teacher and mentor, etc., offered up his daughter to him in marriage. So he got married, and a year later she died, and he was a widow. So the same teacher who lost his daughter said to him, "My brother has a daughter, and I want you in our family." And so he married his wife's cousin, and they had a child. The child's name is Tzvi Yehuda Kook, still alive. Tzvi Yehuda Kook is actually the head of the yeshiva that his father began many, many years ago. Very well respected individual, even more respected than his father, which is interesting. One of Rabbi Kook's, he had many followers from different walks of life, religious, not religious. He had Haredi and non-Zionist Orthodox, Zionist Orthodox, non-Orthodox Zionists, and so different people. One of the things about him, which was interesting, is that he was a vegetarian, except on Shabbat. So on Shabbat, to honor the Shabbat, he reluctantly ate meat or chicken or fish. But otherwise he was a vegetarian, and he had a student who actually wrote his teachings on how to be a vegetarian according to Jewish law. So yeah, so that was it. Just on Shabbat, he felt that he had to in honor of the Shabbat, which is interesting in itself because Shabbat, it says in Code of Jewish Law that you should have basar and dakim, meat and fish, etc. However, and if because of oneg Shabbat, because of to celebrate the Shabbat and the delight of Shabbat. However, the Jewish law is very clear. If by eating meat or fish or fowl, it gives you the antithesis of oneg, pleasure, and it causes you pain and hardship, then eat it. For me, eating tofu would give me displeasure and pain, anxiety, and nausea. So I won't eat it any day in the week, but especially I won't eat it on Shabbat. So his student, who was actually a Nazarite, very rare kind of guy, wrote a book based on Rav Kook's teachings. So he lived in Europe, and he lived in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, etc. At the age of 39, he became the rabbi of Bnei Moshe, and the synagogue Bnei Moshe, which was in Yaffo, which is in part of the Ottoman and Turks and British Palestine, mandate, etc. Bnei Moshe were a very interesting breed. They were off the beaten path. They were considered in the extreme pale of Judaism because they were Karaites. They were the Sabokta or something like that. Sabokta. That sounds like actually the anti-heroin drug, but with a T in it. Anyway, so they only kept the written Torah. They didn't keep the rabbinical Torah at all, and they were frowned upon. They were ostracized. But yet Rav Kook, a fully Orthodox Jew who was a rabbi, who they didn't really, because they only kept Torahs. They only had rabbis that they hired him, and he brought them into the mainstream. He showed them the error of their ways, that one cannot be a Jew and only study Torah, because if you just study Torah literally from Genesis 1 to Deuteronomy chapter, whatever it ends, you wouldn't know what you're talking about, right? You wouldn't know what kosher means. You wouldn't know what tefillin means. You wouldn't know how to slaughter an animal. All this stuff is not mentioned in the Torah. You wouldn't know, for crying out loud, what a mezuzah was. You wouldn't know so many things, because the Torah that we have is a very dense code, and it was cliff notes. Moses was given the additional instruction. What does it mean, keep kosher? Well, what does it mean, don't mix meat and milk? What does it mean, etc., etc.? So the Torah gave the cliff notes, and Moses wrote it down, and eventually Moses wrote down the cliff notes and orally explained what it means. And then eventually it was written down and became the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Code of Jewish Law, etc. So he brought these Bnei Moshe, he brought them into the fold of Judaism, because they were really ostracized. While he was the rabbi of Bnei Moshe, he wrote many, many, many books. Most of them were only published posthumously. Not sure why. He traveled far and wide. He traveled all across Israel to the kibbutzim and to the moshavim. These were socialist enclaves, very, very secular. And he traveled as a visiting rabbi, as a rabbi that a caring rabbi. And he traveled to teach them about kosher, about Shabbat, about tithing. And he was very, very warm and an extremely non-judgmental person. Right? And he had a saying, right? And because people said, you're too embracing with the non-Orthodox. You're too... and he had a saying. He says, I'm quite capable of rejecting people. But I leave that to others, because there are so many rejectors and very few embracers. So I'm going to embrace. He's part, and one of the reasons why, to me, he was a great man, but one of the reasons why he was a controversial figure is because he completely embraced fellow Jews. He wasn't about rejecting. He wasn't about, no, you're doing this wrong. He wasn't about pushing away. He was about bringing close, right? And he was actually hated by his approach, his warm approach, because it was so novel, and the orthodoxy, traditional orthodoxy, or Haredi orthodoxy, initially felt he was dangerous, that he would water down Judaism, that he would be too accepting, too embracing, and he would actually bend and compromise too much. And if you bend too much, your back will break and the spine will break, and that's what they were concerned about. And he was just brilliant. The empathy that this man showed for fellow human beings was incredible. And we'll see some of his lessons as we travel along on this journey together. In 1919, he became the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. In 1921, he became the first chief rabbi of Palestine, of Israel, of British mandated Palestine, of Israel. Now, to become the first chief rabbi is not only you have to be knowledgeable, and not only you have to have a good understanding of Torah and prophets and halacha, right? Not only that, but you also have to be politically savvy, right? You're elected chief rabbi. You're not appointed. You're elected. And he is a man who was an honest politician, which means that he embraced non-Orthodox Zionists. He embraced Orthodox Zionists. He embraced Orthodox non-Zionists who are at odds. Now, the idea, just so we understand, what does a non-Zionist mean, a Jewish non-Zionist? A Jewish non-Zionist means, it's not that you're a Jew that doesn't hold of Israel, what Israel is doing. That makes you a jerk. You're not non-Zionist. Jews that condemn Israel, they believe me, if not for Israel, there would be there's a very high possibility there would be ovens, made, and where they would throw the Jews in. No, an Orthodox non-Zionist, or a non-Zionist, who's and it basically goes like this, is that many people in Orthodox felt that we can only get Israel back if the Messiah comes, and that's God's decision. We can only build the Holy Temple back when Messiah comes, and that's God's decision. So therefore, Israel is not ours until Messiah comes. Which means that they're okay with Israel being under British mandate. They're okay being under the Ottoman mandate. A Zionist Jew says, hold on a second, we understand Messiah is not here, but this is part of the plan. It's not going to be, and a miracle, all of a sudden, poof, we're brought on clouds or on the backs of eagles and we're in Israel. No, this is a process, a messianic process. The first thing we have to do is come to the land, move to the land. And there was a big debate about it. And there was a hostile debate for that matter. Rav Kook was in the middle. He said, look, absolutely the case where we cannot, Mashiach has to come, Messiah has to come in order for us to really be considered holy land, and and with a temple, etc. However, right, for whatever reason, God started it. He started this process. We're here. We've gotten a little piece of land, and then in 67 we got a little bigger piece of land, a lot bigger piece of land. He said, let's hold on to it. Let's hold on to it. In 1948 we got it. Let's hold on to it. Let's increase the land. And he says both sides can be true at the same time. We cannot do the foolish thing to say, no, we want no part of Israel. We cannot do the foolish thing and say, okay, Israel, Messiah is here, because it's not. So he basically had one foot in each world as an Orthodox rabbi. For him to accept the position, let alone be voted in as the chief rabbi, meant that he respected the other sides, both sides. And that's what made him unique. He was a come together type of guy, not a divider. He wasn't my way is the highway. He felt this was part of the master plan. Let it be ruled by whomever, but we have to live in Israel. We have to elevate Israel Jewishly. The more kosher, the better. The more mitzvahs, the better. And we, God forbid, cannot be put in danger. We have to protect ourselves. Recognizing that, no, Messiah's not here. This is not redemption yet. This is not redemption. He says, but this is part of God's plan, and we can't ignore it. He had so many detractors, in Mea Sharim, which is a very, very ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem, the new city of Jerusalem, not too far from the old city. They put up these papers, women, if you're not dressed modestly, don't come in here. If you're, in different rules. In the 1920s, they had, in the 1900s, 1910, 1915, they had huge posters condemning him to say that he's wicked and we can't believe our luck. This is before he became chief rabbi. And even when he was chief rabbi, he as the chief rabbi, he gave a eulogy at Theodor Herzl's funeral. He was lambasted. His father-in-law wanted to disown him, and he wrote to his father-in-law a letter, which is printed, to say, they're accusing me of saying things I never said. Right? I'm the chief rabbi, for crying out loud. But I'm an honest to God, simple individual that keeps Jewish law. They beat him up. However, a few years later, when people realized that this guy's just a genius, there was another huge posters put up in Mea Sharim with 80 signatures of very esteemed rabbis, even some rabbis who signed in the previous one, that retracted to say, you know what, we not understand where he's going. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneesen, addressed him as the godly, saintly, scholarly individual. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe did not mince words. He was not politically correct. The fact that he addressed him as such, as well as so many others addressed. They say that there was a rabbi, a great rabbi, who was anti-Zionist. He was an Orthodox rabbi, anti-Zionist. But they went fundraising together for Israel. They went fundraising together for different things. They didn't agree with each other, but on their ideology of Israel. But my goodness, they respected each other as scholars and rabbis and what they could do together. We're lacking that now. These days we have all or nothing. These people understood it's not all or nothing. You can agree to disagree and be disagreeable. And that is what Rav Kook brought out. You know what? I see certain similarities between the Chabad Lubavitch movement, right? So, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right, who had his share of detractors, right? That, what are you doing? You're sending Chabad rabbis to different corners of the world and places where there's no Jewish infrastructure and there's no mikveh and there's no Jewish food and they have to homeschool their kids, so now you have Zoom. or they have to travel an hour to get to a school, or what are you doing, Rabbi? It's wrong, and just let it go, let the secular intermarry, and let the. And the Rebbe said, what? I myself, so I'm a Chabad guy, right? I was sent here by the Rebbe himself when the Rebbe was alive, all those years ago. The Rebbe sent me here, and I haven't had it recently, because I think just like Rav Kook, people came around to this concept of embracing, loving, caring, empathetic, compassion. That was the Rebbe's motivation. So I used to get, and somebody, I remember he's from West Hempstead, who sent me an email, anonymous. I mean, the email I couldn't figure out, I forget what the name was, and, you have to forget these things. He sent me, he says, how dare you do this to your wife and kids? You're a wicked, wicked man. Take your thumb out of your behind and get out of there. And treat your wife, don't do this to your wife, and don't do this to your kids, and you're just gonna get hurt, and there's that was the type of thing that this fellow said to me, and then you got it from secular Jews. What the hell are you doing here? Who are you? You're an interloper. I said, how am I an interloper if I live here? Right, that was part of the Rebbe's deal, is you have to live. You can't commute. You got to live. So I got it from all sides. Less so. I think the world is wisening up. But Rav Kook, he was all about embracing the common denominator. We all love Jews. We all love Torah. We all love morality. We all love good values. We all love Israel. That was his thing. And he was maligned, and he was misquoted, but he persevered. To date, he has his kid runs a huge yeshiva, which is an Orthodox Zionist group, but different than Bnei Akiva. He actually wrote letters to Bnei Akiva. Don't water down. You're watering down too much. Bnei Akiva is another Orthodox Zionist group. He said, hold your head up high. When he was being attacked and lambasted, people were they're maligning him. He explained as follows. He said, look, when God told Solomon, Moses, to build the temple, he says, let's take the holy temple in Jerusalem. Right? Opulent temple. It was built by everybody from all walks of life. The one in the desert was built by Jews, but the one in the Holy Temple, they hired contractors, right? They hired contractors, and it didn't take them 6 years to paint the ceiling like the guy in Sistine Chapel, right? They hired contractors, Jewish contractors, non-Jewish contractors, observant, not observant. Foreigners, from Turkey and Egypt and Syria and Assyria and Greece, and they built it, and they were all over the temple. They were all in the holies of holies. Once it was built, then only the high priest can go into the holies of holies only on Yom Kippur. So Rav Kook was saying there's a time and a place for everything. Now's not the time to be judgmental and fragmented. He says, let's embrace people. Let's do the best we can now. And then we can always give a little mussar. We can always give, we can always give a little rebuke here and there. But to start off with rebuke is insane. And to me, he broke the way. He led the path. He broke the story of what we have in Israel today. We have Orthodox Jews who are running to be chief rabbi. When he did it, he was hated for striking deals with Zionists, Orthodox and non-Orthodox for that matter. He had a vision, and he lived his vision. He should be an inspiration to us to live our lives according to our vision. And look him up. Look him up. And the Marav Yeshiva that he has in Israel, it's worth a visit. It's pretty impressive. This is Rabbi Sachs finishing the lesson on Rav Kook. If you have any questions, you may ask it here. Please feel free, by the way, to share these videos. They're less than a half hour each one. Share that they exist. You can find them at thechaicenter.com/academy. You can contact me at rabbi@thechaicenter.com. You can also find it on YouTube, youtube.com, and put in The Chai Academy. God bless.